Train the muscles, not the joints.
Welcome back to Natural Gland Bodybuilding. And today I'm just going to do some bench presses in the garage. I'm doing a whole body workout today, but sometimes it's easier if I'm just doing one or two exercises and I just set up the camera, then I can talk to you guys. So I don't have a cameraman really. I mean, I pretend to have a cameraman once in a while, but the truth is I am the cameraman. So that's kind of how it works. But one thing I want to talk about is something that is debated a lot online. So one of the things debated about is stretch of the muscle. And what people talk about when they talk about stretch of the muscle is that they assume that it has to be the full stretch of a muscle in order to get a certain result. Now, I've always talked about this, and what I've always said is that yes, you want to stretch the muscle belly, but once that stretch starts to transfer to the tendon insertion, and you guys can all feel this, right? Like if you stretch out your hamstrings, you can feel the belly of the hamstring stretching. But then at some point, if you bend over way too much or you flex the hips way too much, you start to feel the tendon insertions behind the knees. And that's where I would say you're stretching too much when it comes down to working with higher amounts of weight or medium rep ranges, say anything below 15 reps or something like that. Once you start to feel that stretch in that area, then it's time to adjust your range of motion, especially when you're using heavier weights, right? When you're using lighter weights, then you can adjust form quite a bit. So I've talked about this at length as well. Like sometimes it can be very rehabilitative to use lighter weights through a fuller range of motion. But once you're doing that, your exercise is more for rehab purposes, but it's not necessarily for muscle growth purposes, although it will transfer, it will help, right? So of course, if your joints are healthier or if your muscle is able to protect the joint in more stretch states, if it's able to do that, then yes, that will transfer to less injuries when you're using heavier weight, even with partial ranges of motion and so forth. But there's always an extreme that people want to take this to. They want to overstretch the crap out of the joints. They want to do full range of motion around the joint instead of paying attention to what's going on in the joint, what's the experience, right? And then basically they end up snapping something or irritating something over the long run and then saying, oh, I can't do this exercise because it just doesn't work for me. Well, no, it's the way you're doing it that can also play a big factor in whether that exercise works for you or not. So this is a really big misunderstood thing. A lot of people also then, will say, oh, well, you look like garbage, you don't know what you're talking about. I had somebody say this, it always happens, right? People say this shit. But of course, I'm not in the peak of my career. And obviously, I've had injuries outside the gym. Like I talk about, the dislocating shoulder from hockey, torn rotator cuff, all this stuff. This all happened in hockey, didn't happen in weight training. But people will use that somehow as a platform to say, oh yeah, you don't have enough development here or development there, and they try to critique you from a bodybuilding standard, not taking into account other factors that have nothing to do with the weight training itself. If you guys look back on my career history, I have the career highlights right on here. When I was winning competitions, I didn't have any glaring weak links with my chest or any of that kind of stuff. I was perfectly symmetrical enough to win the nationals and to get very high placing in all my pro shows and natural bodybuilding shows I went into. So yeah, so if you guys are wondering whether these techniques I'm talking about really apply to bodybuilding, yeah, they do apply to bodybuilding. It's just that sometimes life happens, car accidents and downhill skiing and separating a shoulder on a tree or something. Like this stuff happens sometimes, right? And this will also affect how your physique looks. So yeah, word to the wise, or word from the wise, I will say, if you want to have a long bodybuilding career, I wouldn't recommend playing contact sports, high velocity stuff. I'd recommend sticking to training and doing controlled type exercise stuff. But playing sports can sometimes be a problem. As much as I love sports, but sometimes it can be a problem because whenever you have velocity, momentum, awkward sort of falls included, and hard stable objects like trees and stuff, it can sometimes play a role in sidelining your bodybuilding career, right? So yeah, you have to choose what you want to make your main priority. But yeah, if not having injuries is your main priority, then yeah, velocity sports can sometimes be something to avoid. Feels pretty good, pretty easy today, actually, 225. So I'm gonna move up in weight. And I might experiment with something. So somebody in the comments just brought up a question. They said, what if you just do top range partial movements to get used to heavier weight, and then from there, it'll help your nervous system acclimate to that heavier weight, and then your strength may increase over time because of it. So yeah, this is a standard practice a lot of powerlifters use. Like you'll see them put wooden blocks on their chest and just touch the bar, but basically they're not coming down right to the chest, right? They're doing this partial range in order to really work that lockout position. And then you also see them using bench shirts, right? So there's a lot of springiness at the bottom, so that takes quite a bit of weight off the bottom. And then at the top, they have a little bit more tension to work with. And I mean, I know that those are used mostly for competition, but in the same sort of premise, they basically use chains on the side of the bar. So the weight is lighter in the lowest portion of the lift. And then as you lift it, the weight gets perpetually heavier, right? So this does two things. It helps strengthen the lockout position of the lift, which is where most powerlifters have their issue on bench. You know, all the powerlifters I talked about, they always say the lockout is where they have the hardest time. And secondarily, they also are able to lift heavier weights with less wear and tear on the joints, because the wear and tear is happening more in this stretched position. So a lot of people think that by overstretching the crap out of something and putting a lot of heavier weight on it, that's where the least amount of wear and tear is going to happen on the joint. Well, no, the most wear and tear is going to happen in that position. Like I said, jiu-jitsu, right? The snapping all happens in the stretch position. So whether you're stretching the rotator cuff or stretching the elbows or the knees or whatever, that's basically how you tweak something. It's not usually in a partial range of motion sort of capacity. So anyway, what I'm saying is that another way that you can use this powerlifting technique is, yes, to use a bit of heavier weight. Of course, work up carefully. You know, don't go over the top too quickly. And do a few partial reps just to get used to that heavier weight. And make sure, of course, you're always warmed up before you do that. Or have a bar in place, like a spotter. You want to basically make sure that you're spotted just in case the bar collapses or something. You know, again, you always got to think safety. But as long as you're thinking about that, this can be a good way for you to blast through certain strength barriers in your lifts. All right, so I just put some weight on the bar, 275. And yeah, just some of you guys out there will see me doing training videos where I'll rep out and stuff, but sometimes I do a little bit of heavier weight too. So again, I always find the synergy is important. It's just one of those things where I don't train polarized, where everything is just heavyweight or everything's just light. It's a matter of what does my body allow me to do. But I find I get the best results by combining. So some days light, some days heavier. Sometimes it might be more often where I'm doing 20, 25 reps or 15 reps for sets. I find that's great. But at the same time, I still need to interlace some of that heavyweight from time to time. Otherwise, I do not get the same results, right? And I'm talking about heavyweight with the compound lifts. A lot of times with the isolation lifts, I'm doing higher rep ranges and stuff because I'm trying to isolate that muscle. And if I do heavy, then I find it puts a lot more stress on the joints with the isolation exercises. So you're going to have to play with this a bit. So heavyweight, I usually isolate more so to the compound lifts. So. Now the thing is, sometimes you'll lift heavier weight, right? Or a weight maybe that you haven't lifted for a period of time for reps and stuff, like me doing 275. And you'll notice that maybe you lose a couple reps like I did, like I lost 2 or 3 reps off the bench. But that doesn't necessarily mean you've lost strength. Sometimes it's about the groove, right? And when you lose the groove with that heavier weight, it'll give you that illusion that you're not as strong. But the truth is that sometimes you have to perfect the groove. And for me, it's particularly important because my shoulders move around the labrums quite a bit because of the hockey injuries, right? So that causes me, let's just say, a higher level of sensitivity to perfecting my groove. So if I use heavier weight more often, then I can get acclimated to that groove. But I'm not a powerlifter, so I'm not looking at strength as my primary focus, although it's a part of the whole picture. So really what I'm saying is don't get worried about it. It's not that big of a deal. A lot of times it's just recalibrating, because I could see also because of this bench is kind of sideways, because I'm in a garage, right? So the floor is a little sloped, and I do have it adjusted here a bit, but there's still a certain amount of incline that my bench is on. So sometimes I have to adjust my grip accordingly and make sure that I'm even. And this time I felt like a little bit more of the weight was on my right side than my left. So that also plays a factor. But like I said, in the end, it doesn't matter. As long as you're hitting failure, as long as you're trying to hit the muscle as hard as possible, then, you know, just trust in the process. That's really it, you know. We'll see what the next set looks like. I might actually get a better groove this next set, or I might be fatigued. So here's the other thing. I did some heavy shoulders the other day, and I did about 7 or 8 sets of it. And sometimes if you're doing some shoulder presses and you're doing lots of sets, I did like 5 sets, and I did a bunch of sets for bent over laterals. The shoulders could be fatigued, so that can also influence my bench press today. But does that mean my strength went backwards? No, it just means that I'm still dealing with the side effect of fatigue. But overall, I'm becoming stronger and bigger. So it's important for you not to micromanage that whole strength thing too much, because you can get wrapped up in it, and sometimes you can misinterpret the data. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Now, what heavy partials could look like on bench is, like right now, I'm just gonna use the same weight I've been working with. And I'm kind of fatigued because I did 3 sets to failure, right? But basically what you'd do is you'd make sure you're warmed up enough, and then you'd put enough weight on the bar after doing several warm-ups in a row. And then you'd acclimate yourself to doing that partial rep. And then you may go up into a weight that you're not used to using and feel your way through that. But basically what I'll do is I'll show you right now. So this would be a partial rep. I just like this, like a little. Now the funny thing is with bench press, sometimes the partial rep is harder. And this is the funny thing. This is the crazy thing. Sometimes the partial rep is harder than the full rep because you don't have that elastic energy of the stretch of the muscle to propel you through the movement. So one thing you could do is this type of weight, like say you do your working sets and then finish it off with just some partials for the next successive sets, and see if that helps hit your muscle in a different way. But it's not something that is automatically easier. And that's the one misnomer that I see on YouTube all the time, is that people think that, oh, less range of motion means it's automatically easier. No, sometimes it's harder because you're not getting that bounce out of the bottom from the elasticity of the muscle. So yeah, that's what I have to say about that. Let me do another set of that. I'm gonna, just for fun. I haven't done that in a long time, so let's play around here. That actually hurts. I'm telling you, you try that out. Try that out at the end of your workout. Just do your full bench workout, and then with the same weight, just do partials and see what it feels like. It's like a tight like a tiger mountain. Just pushing the muscle to failure is going to have a certain effect. And people get so obsessed with whether there's 2 inches range of motion in this direction or 1 degree extra range of motion there. But in the end, what are you doing? You're just trying to basically make sure that the muscle adapts and gets better. Like walking hills is a primary example. Very little range of motion in walking a hill. But if you put weight on your back, I guarantee you, you will put on muscle on those quads, muscle on the ass, and muscle on the calves. So the thing is that it's not just so simple as more range of motion and more results. It's more like more intensity, more results. In most cases, it's more on that side of the spectrum. And whatever range of motion helps you increase that intensity is more the answer than just range of motion, like trying to turn it into yoga or something, right? Now, one place where I find this really hamstrings a lot of people is that they get so focused on perfect technique all the time that they never push themselves in uncomfortable territory, right? They never use heavy weight where the form changes and stuff, but that does add a different type of intensity on the muscle. It does have some relevance. It doesn't mean that it's the only piece of the puzzle, but using heavy weight, sometimes breaking form in order to do so, can also increase intensity on certain areas. And then, of course, doing perfect technique and high repetitions can increase intensity in other areas. So it's a matter of dispersing this intensity through many different strategic ways, and therefore you get a better amount of overall muscle growth. So those reps don't look as pretty as the 30-pound reps, but it's 50-pound dumbbells, and I'm getting a different type of intensity. I'm getting an intensity on a certain area that I just don't get from using the 30s. Go figure. Motion. So really, the greatest part of my training when I was getting ready for competitions and stuff was I had a large amount of this in my life, and that was I don't give a about what other people think of my training. and I'm going to tell you right now, the I don't give a about what the rest of the world thinks about your process around how you're getting results. It's tremendously powerful. And because of the social media age where we have this audience around everything you do, like I was lucky, I grew up in the 80s, so I didn't have social media or cameras around me or anything when I was training in the gym in the 90s and 2000s and stuff. But now it's almost like there's so much criticism coming at people from every single direction about what the right thing is, that they're almost taught to devalue their own internal truth or their internal wisdom, right? It's like they're constantly looking outwards. So I talk about this, like the training by committee sort of scenario. But I find that sometimes some of the shit that I do that works the best looks the least pleasant on camera, but it works the best for muscular gains, at least for me. So you have to embrace that sometimes your training isn't necessarily going to look pretty. You know, pretty training isn't necessarily more effective training. And that's another thing that that people have to dispel. You have to dispel that. Just get rid of that idea that training has to look a certain way, because sometimes the shittiest looking training is going to give you the best results, right? As long as that intensity is there and whatever, you know. Mountain. So thanks a lot for watching. If you need to get a hold of me, just go to naturalgalantbodybuilding.com, and thanks to the page supporters, and take care for now.